She wasn't lonely in the obvious way. She had friends, clients, a routine. But there's a quiet loneliness that settles in when you realize most people have already chosen their forever, and you're still waiting. Then he showed up. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, at least not at first. He showed effort. He called. He remembered details. He made her feel like love hadn't passed her by after all. When he proposed, she cried, not because it was sudden, but because it felt safe. When he asked for help funding a business opportunity, she didn't hesitate. She believed in him. She believed in them. What she didn't know was that belief was already being used against her. How much would you sacrifice for the person you plan to marry? And what would you do if the man you sacrificed everything for looked at you one day and said, "I don't know you"? Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. One would think that at 47, for a woman who wasn't doing financially bad, Alice Branch had it going well. But the truth was far more complicated than what anyone saw on the surface. Yes, she owned her salon in East Atlanta. Yes, she had regular clients who trusted her with their hair for weddings, graduations, and important life moments. Yes, she paid her bills on time and kept food in her refrigerator. But success isn't just measured in bank statements and business licenses. There was a hollowness that came with building a life alone, with being the only person who showed up for yourself day after day. Alice felt it every time she locked up her salon at night and drove home to an apartment where no one was waiting. She felt it when her phone stayed silent on weekends. She felt it when she attended her clients' weddings and watched brides walk down aisles toward futures that felt impossibly far from her own reality. Her story didn't start with success. It started with survival. Alice's family had been drowning in financial trouble at the time. Her father had been laid off from the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 12 years, and the bills stacked up faster than he could handle them. Eviction notices appeared on their door. The phone rang constantly with collectors demanding payments they couldn't make. Alice remembered hearing her parents argue late into the night, her mother's voice getting sharper and louder with each passing week. Then one morning, Alice woke up and her mother was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty closet and a note left on the kitchen table that said she couldn't do it anymore. Her father never talked about it. He simply picked up 2 jobs and worked himself into exhaustion to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. He sacrificed everything to give Alice a better future. He worked the early morning shift at a gas station and then went straight to his evening job stocking shelves at a grocery store. He came home smelling like motor oil and cleaning products, too tired to do much besides collapse on the couch. But he never missed a parent-teacher conference. He never forgot to ask about her homework. He pushed her to focus on her education, to get good grades, to dream bigger than the life they were living. Alice took his words seriously. She studied hard, stayed out of trouble, and graduated high school with honors. Her father cried when she got her acceptance letter to a state college. He told her she was going to do things he never had the chance to do. She believed him. She believed education was the way out. Alice majored in journalism because she wanted to tell stories that mattered. She wanted to uncover corruption, shine light on injustice, hold people in power accountable. She spent her college years writing for the school newspaper, covering local stories, building a portfolio she thought would open doors. When she graduated, she carried that portfolio to every newspaper, magazine, and television station she could find. She sent out dozens of applications. She followed up with phone calls. She showed up in person when she could. The responses came slowly, and almost all of them said the same thing. Not enough experience. Not the right fit. We'll keep your resume on file. Some companies didn't bother responding at all. Alice started questioning everything. Was it because she didn't have connections? Was it because she didn't come from the right background? Was it something she couldn't change about herself? The more she tried, the more doors seemed to close. The bills didn't care about her dreams. She needed income immediately, so she took a job as a waitress at a chain restaurant off the highway. The work was nothing like what she'd studied for. It was exhausting and demeaning in ways she hadn't expected. Customers snapped their fingers at her. They complained about things that weren't her fault. They left bad tips or no tips at all. Her feet ached by the end of every shift, and she came home smelling like grease and fried food. She'd spent 4 years earning a degree, and now she was refilling drinks and scraping plates. It felt like a waste. It felt like failure. She hated every minute of it, but she didn't have another option. The rent was due. Her father's medical bills were piling up. She couldn't afford to quit. One evening, a coworker asked if Alice could style her hair for a wedding she was attending that weekend. Alice had always been good with hair. Even as a kid, she used to braid her classmates' hair during recess. In college, her roommates would ask her to do their hair before parties or dates. She enjoyed it. It felt creative in a way journalism had stopped feeling. She agreed to help her coworker, and the woman paid her $50. That was more than Alice made in tips on most nights. The coworker was thrilled with the results and told 3 other people. Before Alice knew it, she was doing hair on the side, making more money on weekends than she did waiting tables all week. It wasn't what she'd planned for her life, but it was something she could actually do well, something people valued. She enrolled in cosmetology school at night, while continuing to work at the restaurant during the day. The schedule was brutal. She barely slept. But she pushed through because she saw a way forward. She passed her licensing exam on the first try and started renting a small booth at a salon in East Atlanta. Her first few months were slow. She handed out business cards at grocery stores and laundromats. She offered discounts to new clients. She worked holidays and weekends. Gradually, word spread. People liked her work. They told their friends. Her schedule started filling up. After 2 years, she'd saved enough to lease her own small space. The building was old. The floors creaked. The mirrors had scratches. The plumbing leaked when it rained hard. But it was hers. She'd built it with her own hands, her own sweat, her own refusal to give up. Her father came to the grand opening. He was in his 60s by then, and his health had been declining for years. Decades of physical labor had destroyed his back and knees. He moved slower now, with a limp he tried to hide. But he stood in her salon that day and looked around with tears in his eyes. He told her he was proud of her. He told her she'd done something incredible. Alice hugged him and tried not to cry. She knew how much he'd sacrificed to get her to this point. She knew he'd worked himself into the ground so she could have opportunities he never had. Now she was finally able to give something back. She became his caretaker on top of running her business. She drove him to doctor's appointments. She picked up his prescriptions. She made sure he ate proper meals. He never complained, but she could see the exhaustion in his face. He'd given her everything, and now his body was giving out. Her dating life had been a long string of disappointments that left wounds she didn't talk about. There was the man who borrowed $2,000 to fix his car and then disappeared the moment she asked when he'd pay her back. There was another who moved into her apartment, ate her food, used her electricity, slept in her bed, and contributed nothing for 6 months before finally leaving when she confronted him. One man convinced her to co-sign a loan for a business idea he swore would take off. The business never materialized, and Alice was stuck paying off the debt alone. She learned too late every time. They saw her success as something to exploit, not something to respect. They saw her willingness to help as weakness, not strength. By the time she reached her mid-40s, she'd stopped actively looking for love. She told herself she didn't need it. She had her work. She had her father. She had friends. She was fine. But loneliness doesn't announce itself loudly. It creeps in quietly during the moments when you're not paying attention. Alice felt it most at night when she came home from the salon. The apartment was always quiet. No one asked how her day went. No one cared if she ate dinner or skipped it. No one noticed if she was tired or stressed or happy. She existed in her own small world, and most days that was enough. But some days, it wasn't. She didn't think of herself as desperate, but part of her still hoped. Part of her still believed that maybe, somewhere, there was someone who would see her as more than just a resource to drain. Someone who would stay. Someone who would choose her, not because of what she could provide, but because of who she was. She didn't know if that person existed, but she hadn't completely stopped hoping. And that hope, as quiet and buried as it was, left her vulnerable in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Before you continue, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps this channel going. Now let's continue. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September when they walked into her salon. Alice was finishing up with a client, carefully wrapping the woman's freshly styled hair in a silk scarf to protect the curls. She walked the client to the front desk, processed her payment, and thanked her for coming. The door chimed as the client left, and immediately after, it chimed again. Alice looked up and saw them. A man and a woman, walking in together with the kind of ease that only comes from genuine comfort with each other. The man held the door open for the woman, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as she stepped inside. They were both smiling, exchanging words Alice couldn't quite hear, but could tell were affectionate from the way they looked at each other. The woman was beautiful. She looked to be in her mid-30s, confident in the way she carried herself. She wore a fitted dress that showed she took care of her appearance, and her heels clicked against the tile floor as she approached the desk. Her name was Samantha Bridget, and she had an appointment for a wash and style. Alice greeted her warmly and gestured toward the chair. The man didn't leave. Most partners dropped their girlfriends off and went to run errands or sat in the car scrolling through their phones. Not this one. He pulled up a chair near the styling station and sat down, completely present. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking around impatiently. He was watching Samantha with genuine interest, like there was nowhere else he'd rather be. Alice started working on Samantha's hair, sectioning it carefully and applying product. The man made small talk with both of them. He complimented Alice's salon, said it had a welcoming feel to it. He asked how long she'd been in business. When Alice mentioned she'd been running the salon for 3 years, he smiled and said that took real strength. Most people didn't appreciate how hard it was to build something from scratch. Alice felt a small flush of pride at the acknowledgement. Most people didn't notice the work that went into keeping a small business afloat. They just showed up, got their service, and left. This man saw it. He understood it. That stood out to her. As Alice worked, she found herself watching them in the mirror, not in an intrusive way, but in the small, stolen glances you take when something catches your attention. She noticed how he touched Samantha's shoulder when he leaned in to say something quietly. Alice had been in relationships before. She'd dated men who claimed to love her, but none of them had looked at her the way this man looked at Samantha. There was an attentiveness there, a care that felt rare. Alice caught herself thinking that this was what she wanted. Not the expensive clothes or the fancy dinners, just someone who showed up and stayed present. They paid and left after the appointment was done. Samantha thanked Alice and said she'd definitely be back. The man held the door open again as they walked out, and Alice watched them through the window as they got into a car and drove away. She didn't think much about them after that. They were just another couple, another appointment, another Saturday. She finished her remaining clients for the day, locked up the salon, and went home. 2 weeks passed, and the encounter faded into the background of her memory. Then she saw him again. It was late on a Wednesday night, almost 9 o'clock. Alice had spent the entire day at the salon and then gone straight to her father's house to help him sort through medical bills. He'd been to the doctor earlier that week, and the paperwork was overwhelming. By the time she left his house, she was exhausted. She needed groceries. Nothing elaborate, just the basics. Eggs, bread, chicken, maybe some fruit if it wasn't too expensive. She drove to the Kroger near her apartment, grabbed a cart, and walked inside. The store was nearly empty at this hour, just a few people scattered throughout the aisles. Alice moved through the produce section, picking up items without much thought. She turned the corner near the apples and nearly ran straight into someone. It was him, the man from the salon. He was standing there holding an apple up to the light, examining it like he was trying to decide if it was ripe enough. He looked up at the sound of her cart, and his face broke into an immediate smile of recognition. "Hey, I know you," he said. "You're the hairstylist, right? From the salon in East Atlanta?" Alice was surprised he remembered her. Most clients didn't remember their stylists outside of the salon, and he hadn't even been the client. She smiled back and confirmed that yes, she was. He walked over, still holding the apple, and started talking to her like they were old acquaintances catching up. He remembered the name of her salon. He remembered details from their brief conversation 2 weeks ago. Alice felt a warmth spread through her chest. They stood there in the produce section talking, and Alice found herself relaxing into the conversation. He was easy to talk to. He didn't dominate the conversation or talk over her. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. After a few minutes, Alice asked the question that seemed natural given their last interaction. "How's your girlfriend doing?" she asked. His expression changed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but Alice noticed the shift. The easy smile faded slightly, and something heavier settled into his features. He put the apple back down on the display and looked at her directly. "We actually broke up," he said. His voice was quiet, measured. "She was cheating on me. I found out about a week ago." Alice felt her stomach drop. She hadn't expected that. They'd looked so happy together, so connected. "I'm really sorry," she said, and she genuinely meant it. She knew what betrayal felt like. She'd been cheated on before, and the pain of it didn't fade quickly. He shrugged, but there was hurt in his eyes that he couldn't quite hide. "It happens, I guess," he said. "I just didn't see it coming. I thought we had something real, you know. But I guess I was wrong." There was no bitterness in his tone, no anger. Just a quiet sadness that made Alice's heart ache for him. She recognized that kind of hurt. It was the kind that made you question your own judgment. They kept talking. 20 minutes passed without Alice realizing it. He asked about her business, how things were going, if she enjoyed what she did. She asked about his work. He said he was a consultant, that he traveled frequently for different projects with various companies. It sounded vague, but Alice didn't press for details. A lot of people had jobs that were hard to explain in simple terms. He seemed genuinely interested in her life. He asked about the challenges of running a small business. He asked if she had family in the area. She told him about her father, about his declining health, about how she was trying to balance caregiving with running the salon. He listened with the same attentiveness she'd seen him give Samantha that day in the salon. It felt good to be heard. Before they parted ways, he asked if he could have her number. "I'd really like to stay in touch," he said. "It's nice talking to someone who actually gets what it's like to work hard for what you have." Alice hesitated for only a second before giving it to him. She told herself it was just friendly. Two people who'd had a nice conversation exchanging contact information. Nothing more than that. But as she walked to her car, loading her grocery bags into the trunk, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't excitement exactly. It was softer than that. It was possibility. The quiet sense that maybe something good could come from this. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know anything about him beyond a 20-minute conversation in a grocery store. But for the first time in months, she felt a small flicker of hope. And that flicker, as small as it was, made her smile as she drove home. His name was Reynolds Scott. At least, that's what he told her. He texted her the next morning, early enough that Alice saw the message before she even got out of bed. It was simple and thoughtful. "Good morning. Hope you have a great day." Most men she'd dated in the past didn't bother with things like that. They texted when they wanted something or when they were bored. This felt different. It felt intentional. Alice texted back, and they fell into an easy rhythm of communication throughout the day. He asked how her appointments were going. He asked if her father was feeling better. He remembered details from their conversation the night before, things most people would have forgotten. By the end of the week, they were texting every day. Nothing invasive or overwhelming, just consistent. He was present without being demanding, and that balance felt refreshing. Their first official date happened the following Tuesday. Reynolds asked if she wanted to grab dinner after she closed the salon. Alice agreed, and they met at a small Italian restaurant on the east side of Atlanta. It wasn't fancy, but the food was good, and the atmosphere was relaxed. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, and Reynolds asked her about her life. Not surface-level questions designed to fill silence, but real questions. He wanted to know why she'd chosen journalism in college. He wanted to know what made her switch to hairstyling. He wanted to know what it was like growing up with just her father after her mother left. Alice found herself opening up in ways she didn't usually allow herself to. She told him about the rejection letters from newspapers. She told him about the waitressing job she'd hated. She told him about the shame she'd felt when her degree seemed worthless. He listened without interrupting. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix anything. He just listened, and when she finished, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. "You've been through a lot," he said. "But look at what you built. You didn't give up. That says everything about who you are." Alice felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She wasn't used to people seeing her that way. Most people just saw the salon, the business, the surface. They didn't see the years of struggle that went into building it. Reynolds saw it. He understood it. That meant more to her than she could put into words. He shared pieces of his own story, too. He said he worked in consulting, which meant he traveled frequently for different projects. He didn't have family nearby. His parents had died years ago, and he was an only child. He'd been in a few serious relationships, but they never worked out. People didn't understand the demands of his job, the long hours, the time spent away. Samantha had been his most recent relationship, and finding out about the cheating had hurt more than he wanted to admit. Over the next 4 months, Reynolds became woven into the fabric of Alice's daily life. He wasn't loud or flashy about it. He just showed up consistently. On weekends, he'd come by and help her clean the salon or run errands with her. He even went with her to visit her father a few times. Alice's father was skeptical at first. He'd watched Alice get hurt too many times, and he didn't trust people easily. But Reynolds was patient. He didn't try to win her father over with grand gestures. He just showed up and helped. He fixed a leaking faucet in the kitchen. He moved some heavy boxes her father couldn't lift. He sat and watched football on Sunday afternoons without complaining. Slowly, her father's walls started to come down. One evening after dinner, as Alice was getting ready to leave her father's house, he pulled her aside in the hallway. His expression was serious. "Just be careful," he said quietly. "Make sure he's really who he says he is." Alice felt a flash of irritation. "I just don't want to see you hurt again, sweetheart. That's all." Alice kissed his cheek and promised she'd be careful. But inside, she felt frustrated. Reynolds had been nothing but good to her. He'd shown her more care and consistency in 4 months than most men had shown her in years. Why couldn't her father see that? There were small things that didn't quite line up, but Alice rationalized every single one of them. Reynolds never wanted to take photos together. The first time Alice tried to snap a picture of them at dinner, he gently moved her phone away. "I'm really not big on photos," he explained. "After what happened with Samantha, I just prefer to keep things private. She used to post everything online, and when we broke up, it got messy. I'd rather just keep our relationship between us." That made perfect sense to Alice. She understood wanting privacy, especially after being burned. She didn't push the issue. When she asked about his work, he kept the answers vague. Just consulting projects. Contract work. Nothing exciting, honestly. Alice figured it was corporate stuff he didn't want to bore her with. Plenty of people had jobs they didn't like talking about. He deflected questions about extended family. "They're out of state. We're not really close." That wasn't unusual either. Not everyone had tight family connections. He always paid for things in cash. Never used a credit card or debit card. When Alice asked about it once, he laughed it off. "I'm old-fashioned like that. I like knowing exactly how much I'm spending. Cards make it too easy to lose track of your money." Alice thought it was a bit quirky, maybe unusual in an era where everyone used cards for everything. But it wasn't a red flag. She'd known people who preferred cash. Her father had been the same way for years. None of these things felt dangerous on their own. They were just small oddities, little quirks that made Reynolds different from other men she'd dated. One evening in early January, Reynolds came by the salon after Alice had closed for the day. She was in the middle of cleaning up, wiping down the mirrors and sweeping hair off the floor. She heard the door and looked up to see him standing there. His hands were in his pockets, and he looked nervous in a way she hadn't seen before. "Hey," she said, setting the broom aside. "What are you doing here?" He walked over slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. Alice's heart jumped. The way he said it made her nervous. But then he took her hands in his and smiled. "I know this might seem fast," he said. "We've only been together 4 months, but I don't want to waste time pretending I don't know what I want. I've spent too many years in relationships that went nowhere. This is different. You're different." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Alice's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming, but her brain couldn't quite process it. Reynolds opened the box to reveal a simple engagement ring. Nothing extravagant or flashy, just a modest diamond on a silver band. "Will you marry me?" he asked. His voice was relaxed, but his hands were shaking slightly. Alice felt tears spill down her cheeks before she could even form words. She wasn't crying because the ring was expensive. She wasn't crying because the proposal was elaborate or romantic. She was crying because it felt safe. Because for the first time in her entire life, someone was choosing her. Not using her. Not taking from her. Choosing her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Reynolds slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. Alice buried her face in his chest and cried. All the years of loneliness, all the failed relationships, all the nights she'd come home to an empty apartment wondering if anyone would ever see her as enough. It all felt worth it in that moment. She'd found her person. She'd found someone who showed up and stayed. As soon as Reynolds left that night, Alice called her father. She could barely contain the excitement in her voice. "Dad, he proposed," she said. "Reynolds proposed. We're getting married." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, longer than Alice expected. "Congratulations, sweetheart," her father finally said. But his voice didn't carry the joy Alice had hoped to hear. It carried something else. Worry. Hesitation. "Are you sure about him?" he asked carefully. Alice's excitement dimmed just slightly. "Yes, Dad, I'm sure. He's been nothing but good to me." Her father was quiet again. Alice could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel him choosing his words carefully. "Okay," he said finally. "If you're happy, then I'm happy for you." But Alice heard what he didn't say. She heard the doubt underneath his words. She hung up the phone and looked down at the ring on her finger. She told herself her father was just being overprotective. Reynolds loved her. He'd proven it over and over again for 4 months. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to hurt her. She looked at the ring and smiled. This was the beginning of the life she'd been waiting for. She had no idea how horribly wrong she was. 2 weeks after the engagement, Alice was folding towels in the back room of her salon when Reynolds called. She could hear the excitement in his voice before he even said what he was calling about. "I have incredible news," he said. "Remember how I told you I was working on something big? It finally came through." Alice set the towels down and pressed the phone closer to her ear. "What happened?" she asked. Reynolds explained that he'd been in talks with a real estate development firm in Florida for months, and they'd finally offered him a consultant position on a major project. It was a new residential development in Tampa, something that could bring in serious money. The firm wanted him to come down in person to finalize the contract and get started on the initial planning phase. He'd need to be there for about a week, maybe a bit longer depending on how things went. Alice felt a rush of genuine happiness for him. This was exactly what they needed. Reynolds had been working contract jobs for as long as she'd known him, always moving from one temporary gig to another. This sounded different. This sounded like stability. "That's amazing," she said. "When do you leave?" He told her he'd booked a flight for the following Monday. That gave them a few days to spend together before he had to go. Alice felt a small pang of sadness at the thought of him being gone for a week, but she pushed it aside. This was for their future. This was for the wedding they were planning. She could handle a week without him. They'd talked about buying a house eventually, about starting a life that wasn't lived paycheck to paycheck. This opportunity could make that possible. Then Reynolds mentioned the money. He said the firm required a deposit up front to secure his position on the project. It was standard practice for consultant positions like this. He needed to put down $6,000 before they'd officially bring him on board. The firm would reimburse him once the project started, and he received his first paycheck. But for now, he had to cover it himself. Alice felt her stomach tighten. $6,000. She didn't have that kind of money sitting around. Her salon was barely breaking even most months. She was already behind on rent by 2 weeks. She still owed money on the equipment she'd purchased last year. Her father's medical bills were piling up. The idea of pulling together $6,000 felt impossible. Reynolds must have heard the hesitation in her silence. "I know it's a lot," he said quickly, "but this is going to change everything for us, for our wedding, for our future. Once I get this first paycheck, we'll be in a completely different financial position." He explained the projected earnings. The contract was for 6 months with the possibility of extension. He'd be making more than double what he made on his current projects. They could pay off her salon debt. They could afford a real wedding, not just something small and rushed. They could start looking at houses. Alice wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this was the answer they'd been waiting for. She asked how soon he needed the money. He said the firm wanted the deposit by Friday, which gave her 3 days. Alice spent those 3 days scrambling. She went to the bank and withdrew everything she had in her savings account. It wasn't enough. She had a small emergency fund her father had set aside for her years ago when she first opened the salon. He'd told her to only touch it if things got really bad. Alice convinced herself this wasn't bad. This was an investment. This was their future. She withdrew the remaining money from that account. She was still $200 short. She asked one of her regular clients if she could pay in advance for her next 3 appointments. The woman agreed and handed over the cash. Alice felt a wave of shame as she took it, but she pushed it down. This was temporary. Reynolds would pay her back as soon as the firm reimbursed him. On Friday morning, she met Reynolds at a coffee shop near the airport. He had his suitcase with him, ready to leave straight from there. Alice handed him an envelope with the cash inside. He opened it, counted quickly, and smiled at her. "You have no idea how much this means to me," he said. "I'm going to make this worth it. I promise." Alice believed him. She kissed him goodbye in the parking lot and told him what she'd been telling herself all week. "Whatever works for you works for our family." Reynolds' response was brief. He hugged her, said he loved her, and then glanced at his phone. "I really need to get through security," he said. "I'll call you when I land." He was already walking toward the terminal entrance before Alice could say anything else. She watched him disappear into the crowd of travelers and felt a strange emptiness settle in her chest. She told herself it was just nerves. He'd be back in a week. Everything would be fine. The first week started off normal enough. Reynolds called her that evening after he landed in Tampa. He sounded tired but optimistic. He said the meetings had already started, and the firm seemed impressed with his ideas. Alice asked if she could FaceTime him so she could see his face. He said he was in the hotel lobby and it was too noisy. "I'll call you tomorrow when I have more privacy," he promised. She told him she loved him and hung up. The next day, he texted her throughout the day but didn't call. When she tried to reach him in the evening, he answered but sounded distracted. "I'm in the middle of reviewing contracts," he said. "Can I call you back later?" He didn't call back that night. Alice told herself he was busy. This was a big opportunity. She couldn't expect him to drop everything just to talk to her. By the 3rd day, Alice noticed a pattern. Reynolds' texts were shorter. His calls were rushed. Every time she suggested FaceTime, he had an excuse. The hotel Wi-Fi was bad. He was in meetings. He was with the development team and couldn't step away. Alice tried not to let it bother her, but there was a small voice in the back of her mind that kept asking why he couldn't find 10 minutes to video call her. She ignored the voice. She focused on her work instead. She had clients to take care of, bills to pay. Her father needed her to pick up his prescriptions. She stayed busy enough that she didn't have time to worry too much about why Reynolds felt so far away. The second week started with a phone call that made Alice's heart sink. Reynolds called her on Monday evening, and this time he sounded excited instead of distant. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The project expanded. 2 other investors came on board, and they want to scale everything up. This is way bigger than I thought it was going to be." Alice asked what that meant for him. He explained that the firm was offering him a larger role, more responsibility, and significantly higher pay. But there was a catch. Because his position had expanded, he needed to increase his initial deposit. The firm wanted another $4,000 to reflect his bigger stake in the project. Alice felt her chest tighten. "4,000?" she repeated. Reynolds rushed to explain. I know, but this could triple our returns. I'll be making so much more than we originally planned. This is the kind of opportunity people wait their whole lives for." Alice sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at her phone screen. She wanted to believe him, but she didn't have $4,000. She barely had anything left after giving him the first $6,000. She told Reynolds this. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that made her stomach turn. "I understand if you can't do it, but I need to let the firm know by tomorrow, and if I can't come up with the money, they'll give my position to someone else. We'll lose everything we already put in." Alice felt panic rising in her throat. They'd lose the first $6,000? All of it? Reynolds kept talking. "I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. You know that. But this is our future, Alice. This is everything we've been working toward." Alice told him she'd figure it out. She didn't know how, but she'd figure it out. She hung up and sat in her apartment staring at the wall. She had $1,200 left in her checking account. That was supposed to cover rent, utilities, and groceries for the next 2 weeks. If she sent Reynolds $4,000, she'd have nothing. She'd be completely broke. She thought about calling her father, but his health was getting worse, and he was barely getting by on his fixed income. She couldn't ask him for money. That left one option. She picked up her phone and called Corinne Lawson, her best friend since high school. Corinne had always been there for her, and Alice hated herself for what she was about to ask. Corinne answered on the second ring. Alice explained the situation as calmly as she could. She needed to borrow $3,000. It was for Reynolds' business opportunity. She'd pay Corinne back as soon as Reynolds got his first paycheck. Corinne was quiet for a long moment. Alice could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this?" Corinne finally asked. "You already gave him $6,000, and now he needs more? Does that not feel strange to you?" Alice felt defensive immediately. "It's not like that," she said. "The project expanded. It's a good thing. It means more money for us." Corinne sighed. "I'm not trying to judge you, Alice. I just want to make sure you're being careful." Alice promised she was being careful. She promised this was legitimate. She promised she'd pay Corinne back within the month. Corinne agreed to lend her the money, and they met the next day. Alice took the cash, added the $1,200 she had left in her account, and sent the full $4,000 to the account Reynolds gave her. Her hands shook as she hit send on the transfer. Her bank account was now completely empty. She had no rent money, no grocery money, nothing. But Reynolds had promised this would be worth it. He'd promised they'd be in a completely different place financially once this deal closed. Alice told herself to trust him. She told herself this was temporary. She told herself everything would be okay. But the anxiety sitting in her chest didn't go away. It stayed there, heavy and constant, making it hard to breathe. She texted Reynolds to let him know the money had been sent. He responded an hour later with a simple, "Thank you. I won't let you down." That was it. No phone call, no reassurance, just a text. Alice stared at her phone and felt the first real crack of doubt form in her mind. A few days later, Alice was closing up the salon when Corinne stopped by. She brought takeout because she knew Alice probably wasn't eating properly. They sat in the styling chairs and ate in silence for a while before Alice finally spoke. "I need more clients," she said quietly. "Business has been slow and I'm behind on everything. I'd take an out-of-state job at this point if it paid well enough." Corinne looked up from her food, and Alice saw something shift in her expression. "Actually," Corinne said slowly, "I might know someone." Alice asked what she meant. Corinne explained that she had a cousin in Dallas who worked as an event coordinator. The cousin had mentioned recently that a wealthy bride was looking for a hairstylist for her wedding. It was a high-end event, and the bride was willing to pay well. Corinne said she could reach out and see if the position was still available. Alice felt a small flicker of hope for the first time in days. "How much are we talking?" she asked. Corinne said her cousin had mentioned $2,500 for the bride, plus the bride wanted the hairstylist available for 3 bridesmaids, which would bring in additional money. Travel and accommodation would be covered. Alice did the math in her head. If she could make $4,000 in one weekend, she could pay her rent and have enough left over to buy groceries and cover some of her other bills. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would give her breathing room. "Can you ask?" Alice said. Corinne pulled out her phone and texted her cousin right there. Within 20 minutes, she got a response. The position was still open. The bride's wedding planner wanted to speak with Alice directly. Corinne handed Alice the contact information, and Alice saved it in her phone. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe she could fix this. Maybe everything wasn't falling apart after all. Alice called the wedding planner the next morning. The woman's name was Rita Wiley, and she sounded professional and efficient over the phone. She explained that the bride, Esther Brooks, was getting married in 3 weeks at her family's estate in Dallas. Esther wanted a hairstylist who could handle her and 3 of her bridesmaids. Rita asked about Alice's experience, what styles she specialized in, and whether she'd worked high-end events before. Alice answered honestly. She'd done plenty of weddings, but most of them were mid-range. Nothing at this level. Rita seemed satisfied with her answers. She said Esther had looked at Alice's work online and liked what she saw. The job was hers if she wanted it. Rita laid out the terms. Alice would be paid $2,500 for the bride's hair and makeup consultation, trial run, and day of styling. Each bridesmaid would be an additional $500. That brought the total to $4,000. Rita would arrange and pay for Alice's flight and hotel accommodations. She'd be flying out on a Friday, staying through Sunday, and returning home Monday morning. Alice's hands were shaking as she wrote down the details. $4,000. That was more money than she'd made in a single weekend in her entire career. She told Rita she'd take the job. Rita said she'd email the contract and flight details within the hour. Alice thanked her and hung up. She sat at her kitchen table and felt tears of relief roll down her face. This was the break she needed. This was going to save her. She called Reynolds to tell him the news. She wanted to share this moment with him, to hear him tell her he was proud of her. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey," he said, and she could hear voices in the background. "I got a huge job," Alice said quickly. "A wedding in Dallas. It pays $4,000. Can you believe that?" Reynolds' response was distracted. "Yeah, that's great. Look, I'm really in the middle of something right now. Can I call you back later?" Alice felt her excitement deflate. "I just wanted to tell you—" He cut her off. "I know, and that's awesome. I really do have to go, though. I'll call you tonight. Love you." The line went dead before Alice could respond. She stared at her phone and felt something cold settle in her stomach. He hadn't even asked where in Dallas. He hadn't asked when she was going. He'd barely listened at all. Alice told herself he was busy. But the coldness in her stomach didn't go away. She pushed it down and focused on preparing for the trip instead. Rita emailed her the contract later that day. Everything looked legitimate. Professional letterhead, clear terms, a deposit schedule. Alice signed it and sent it back. Within an hour, Rita replied with flight confirmation and hotel details. The plane ticket was first class. The hotel was a nice chain near the estate where the wedding would take place. Everything felt real and legitimate. Alice allowed herself to feel hopeful. Maybe things were finally turning around. The deposit hit Alice's account the next day. $1,250. exactly half of what she'd be paid for the bride. Alice stared at the number on her phone screen and felt like she could breathe again. She immediately paid her overdue rent. She bought groceries for the first time in 2 weeks. She filled up her gas tank. The anxiety that had been sitting on her chest for days lifted slightly. Alice spent the next few days preparing for the Dallas trip. She updated her styling kit, made sure she had all the products she'd need, and researched the latest bridal hair trends. She wanted to impress Esther Brooks. This was the kind of client who could refer her to other wealthy women. This could be the beginning of a whole new level of business for her salon. Corinne helped her pack the night before her flight. They went through Alice's suitcase together, making sure she had everything she needed. Corinne seemed excited for her, but there was something in her expression that Alice couldn't quite read. "What?" Alice finally asked. Corinne hesitated. "Nothing," she said. "I'm just glad you're getting this opportunity. You deserve it." Alice hugged her and thanked her for everything. For the loan. For connecting her with this job. For being the kind of friend who showed up when things got hard. The morning of her flight, Alice texted Reynold to let him know she was heading to the airport. She wrote, "Heading to Dallas for the wedding gig. I'm excited but nervous. Love you." She watched the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that would show he was typing. They appeared after a few minutes, and then his response came through. "Good luck." That was it. 2 words. Alice felt a sharp sting of disappointment. She wanted more than that. She wanted him to tell her she'd do great. She wanted him to ask her to call him when she landed. She wanted something that felt like he cared. But she didn't get it. She put her phone in her bag and told herself to stop overthinking everything. The flight to Dallas was smooth. Alice had never flown first class before, and she felt out of place among the business travelers and wealthy passengers around her. She kept her head down and tried to enjoy the experience. Free drinks, extra legroom, a meal that actually tasted good. When the plane landed, she collected her bag and found Corinne's cousin waiting for her at baggage claim. The cousin's name was Lauren, and she was warm and friendly. She drove Alice to Corinne's apartment, where Alice would be staying for the weekend. Corinne had flown to Dallas a day earlier to spend time with family, and she greeted Alice at the door with a hug. They spent the evening catching up, and Alice felt some of the tension leave her body. She was here. She was going to make $4,000. She was going to be okay. The next morning, a black luxury car arrived to pick Alice up. The driver was polite and professional, holding the door open for her as she climbed into the back seat with her styling kit. The drive took about 30 minutes, winding through Dallas until they reached Highland Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods Alice had ever seen. The houses were enormous, gated properties with perfectly manicured lawns, trees lining the streets like something out of a movie. The car turned into a long driveway that led to a mansion Alice could barely believe was real. It was massive, 3 stories tall with white columns and a fountain in the circular driveway. Staff members were moving in and out of the house carrying flowers and decorations. This was the kind of wealth Alice had only seen on television. A woman in a staff uniform met Alice at the entrance and escorted her inside. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the outside. Marble floors. A grand staircase with a crystal chandelier hanging above it. Artwork on the walls that looked like it belonged in a museum. Alice followed the woman up the staircase to the 2nd floor and down a long hallway. They stopped at a set of double doors, and the woman knocked before opening them. "The hairstylist is here," she announced. Alice stepped into the bridal suite and felt her breath catch. The room was enormous, bigger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens. There was a sitting area with designer furniture, a walk-in closet visible through an open door, and fresh flowers arranged on every surface. Esther Brooks stood near the window, radiant even in her silk robe. She was 28, stunning, with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. She turned when Alice entered and smiled warmly. "You must be Alice," she said, walking over with her hand extended. "I'm Esther. Thank you so much for coming all this way." Alice shook her hand and felt immediately at ease. Esther wasn't cold or dismissive like Alice had feared. She was kind and genuinely excited. She introduced Alice to her bridal party. 6 bridesmaids, all dressed in matching robes, chatting and laughing. Esther's mother, an elegant woman in her 50s who looked Alice over with a critical but not unkind eye. A flower girl, no more than 6 years old, spinning in circles near the window. Makeup artists were already set up in one corner of the room, working on the bridesmaids' faces. Alice set up her styling station near the window where the light was best. She laid out her tools, plugged in her curling iron and straightener, and organized her products. Esther came over and sat in the chair Alice had positioned for her. "I'm so glad you're here," Esther said. "I've been stressing about my hair for weeks." Alice smiled and ran her fingers through Esther's hair, assessing the texture and length. "You have beautiful hair," she said. "We're going to make you look incredible." Esther relaxed visibly, and Alice felt a surge of confidence. This was what she was good at. This was where she belonged. She started working on the first bridesmaid while Esther had her makeup done. The conversation in the room was light and easy. They talked about love, about marriage, about how excited Esther was to start her life with her fiancé. "He's everything I've ever wanted," Esther said at one point, her voice full of joy. "So attentive, so loving. I honestly can't believe I found someone like him." Alice smiled as she worked, thinking about Reynold. She knew exactly how Esther felt. Finding someone who treated you well, who made you feel valued, was rare. She felt grateful that she'd found that too. She was curling the second bridesmaid's hair when she heard a voice from the hallway. Male, confident, close. "Babe, hurry up. Guests are starting to arrive." Alice's hands froze mid-curl. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. Her heart started pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just a coincidence. Lots of men sounded similar. Lots of grooms called their brides babe. It didn't mean anything. But then the voice came again, closer this time. "I'm coming up to check on you." Alice's breath caught in her throat. Her hands were shaking now. She slowly turned toward the door, unable to stop herself. The bridesmaids were still chatting. Esther was laughing at something her mother said. No one else seemed to notice the voice. No one else seemed to care. Alice heard footsteps approaching. Her entire body went rigid. The door opened. And standing there, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo with a boutonniere pinned to his lapel and a groom's sash across his chest, was Reynold. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Alice's mind went completely blank. She couldn't process what she was seeing. Reynold, her fiancé, the man who was supposed to be in Florida working on a business deal, standing in a tuxedo, at someone else's wedding, as the groom. "Reynold?" Alice's voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. She took a step toward him, her legs unsteady. "Reynold, what are you doing here?" He didn't move. His expression didn't change. He looked at her with the kind of polite confusion you'd give a stranger who'd just said something odd. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, his tone measured and calm. "Do I know you?" The words hit Alice like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "Do I know you?" She stared at him, waiting for him to break, to smile, to acknowledge that this was some kind of terrible joke. But his face remained blank. Concerned even, like she was the one behaving strangely. "Stop it," Alice said, her voice rising now. "Reynold, stop playing around. What the hell are you doing here? You said you were in Florida." She was walking toward him now, closing the distance between them. She needed him to look at her. Really look at her. She needed him to stop pretending. Reynold took a small step back, and Alice saw something flash across his face. Not recognition, alarm. He turned slightly toward Esther, who was now standing, her hand pressed to her chest. "Baby," he said gently, "I have no idea who this woman is." The word woman felt like a slap. Not Alice, not her. Woman, like she was nobody, like she didn't exist. Alice's hands were shaking violently now. "You're lying," she said, her voice breaking. "You proposed to me. We're engaged. You asked me for money, and I gave it to you. All of it. $10,000. Her voice was getting louder with each word. She was aware that everyone in the room was staring at her now, but she didn't care. She held up her left hand, showing the ring on her finger. The ring he had given her. "You gave me this ring 2 months ago. You told me you loved me. You told me we were building a future together." The bridesmaids gasped. One of them put her hand over her mouth. Esther's mother stood up, her face hardening. Esther herself looked between Alice and Reynold, confusion and fear written all over her face. Reynold remained impossibly calm. He glanced at the ring on Alice's finger, then back at her face. "I think you have me confused with someone else, ma'am," he said. The word ma'am cut through Alice like a blade. It was dismissive, distant. The way you'd speak to someone you didn't know, someone who was bothering you. Alice felt tears burning in her eyes. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Please don't do this to me." Reynold turned to Esther, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, apologetic. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said. "Unstable people who fixate. I've never seen this woman before in my life." Esther looked at Alice, and Alice saw the doubt forming in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Esther asked, her voice shaking. Alice tried to steady her breathing, tried to make herself sound rational and coherent. "This man, Reynold Scott, he's my fiancé. We've been together for 4 months. He proposed to me in January. He asked me to help him with a business opportunity, and I gave him $10,000. He told me he was in Florida closing a deal. He was supposed to come back next week so we could start planning our wedding." Her words were tumbling out now, desperate and frantic. "I don't know what he's doing here, or why he's pretending he doesn't know me, but I'm telling you the truth. He knows exactly who I am." Rita Wiley, the wedding planner, appeared in the doorway behind Reynold. She must have heard the commotion because her face was tight with irritation. "What's going on here?" she demanded. Reynold gestured toward Alice. "This woman just walked into the bridal suite and started calling me by a different name," he said. "She's claiming we're engaged. She's becoming aggressive." Alice's voice rose again. "I'm not aggressive. I'm telling the truth." Rita's eyes narrowed as she looked at Alice. "You need to calm down right now or I'm calling security." Alice felt panic rising in her chest. No one was listening to her. No one believed her. She turned back to Reynold, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? Why are you lying?" Reynold stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost pitying. "If I'm really your fiancé," he said, "what's my full name?" Alice's confidence surged. She knew his name. Of course, she knew his name. "Reynold," she said firmly. "Reynold Scott." Reynold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and removed his driver's license. He held it up so everyone in the room could see it. Alice's eyes focused on the card, and the ground seemed to fall away beneath her feet. The name on the license wasn't Reynold Scott. It was Nathan Smith. Same face, same man, different name entirely. Alice stared at the ID, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You told me your name was Reynold. You introduced yourself as Reynold Scott." Nathan, or Reynold, or whoever he was, spoke calmly. "My name is Nathan Smith. I've never met you before today. I don't know why you're doing this, but you need to leave." Esther was crying now, her hands covering her face. Her mother stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Someone handle this immediately. This woman is trying to ruin my daughter's wedding." Rita pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security." Alice felt her world collapsing. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "I have proof," she said desperately. "I have text messages. I have bank transfers. I can show you everything." She unlocked her phone and opened her messages, scrolling frantically to find the conversation with Reynold. But as she scrolled, something cold settled in her stomach. The name at the top of the conversation thread said, Reynold Scott, not Nathan Smith. The bank transfers were sent to accounts under different names. None of them matched. Nothing matched. She looked up at Reynold, Nathan, and saw him watching her with that same blank, polite expression. "Show me one picture of us together," he said quietly. "Just one." Alice's hands froze. She opened her Photos app and started scrolling. She scrolled through weeks of photos. Pictures of her salon. Pictures of her father. Pictures of her clients. But there were no pictures of her and Reynolds. Not a single one. She scrolled faster, panic clawing at her throat. How was this possible? They'd been together for 4 months. How did she not have a single photo of them together? And then she remembered. Every time she tried to take a picture, he'd stopped her. He'd always had a reason. A good reason. "I don't like how I look in pictures. Let's just enjoy the moment. I prefer to keep things private after what happened with my ex." She'd believed him. She'd trusted him. And now she had no proof. No proof they'd ever been together at all. Alice looked up, tears streaming down her face. 2 security guards had entered the room. Large men in black uniforms. Rita pointed at Alice. "Escort her out. Now." The guards moved toward her, and Alice backed away. "No," she said. "No, you don't understand. I'm telling the truth. Check the bank records. I sent him money. $10,000. It has to be traceable." Nathan shook his head sadly. "She just walked in here and called me babe in front of my bride. She's clearly unwell. I feel bad for her, but this is my wedding day." Esther was sobbing now, her mother's arms wrapped around her. The bridesmaids were whispering to each other, casting horrified glances at Alice. Rita's face was red with fury. "I vouched for you," she hissed at Alice. "Corinne's cousin recommended you, and now you're trying to destroy this wedding and ruin my reputation." One of the guards took Alice by the arm. She tried to pull away. "Please," she begged. "Please, someone has to believe me." But no one did. The guards pulled Alice toward the door. She was screaming now, screaming Reynolds' name over and over. "Reynold! Reynold! Why are you doing this to me?" Nathan stood in the doorway, his face expressionless, and watched as they dragged her out. The last thing Alice saw before the door closed was Esther collapsing into her mother's arms, and Nathan turning away like nothing had happened. Like Alice Branch didn't exist, like she never had. The security guards escorted Alice down the grand staircase, their grips firm on her arms. She was still crying, still trying to explain, but they weren't listening. One of them spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder, requesting backup to make sure she left the property. Alice's legs felt weak beneath her. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could Reynolds stand there and pretend he didn't know her? How could he look her in the eyes and lie so convincingly? The guards walked her through the front entrance and out to the circular driveway where her styling kit had already been placed on the ground. One of the guards spoke firmly. "You need to leave this property immediately. If you come back, we'll call the police." Alice stood there in the driveway, staring up at the mansion. She could see movement in the windows. The wedding was continuing. No one was stopping it. No one cared that her entire life had just been destroyed. She picked up her styling kit with trembling hands and walked down the long driveway toward the street. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't have the car service anymore. She pulled out her phone and called Corinne. Her friend answered on the first ring. "Alice, where are you?" Corinne's voice was strained, worried. Alice told her she'd been thrown out. She was walking down the street in Highland Park with nowhere to go. Corinne said she'd come get her immediately. Corinne pulled up 20 minutes later. Alice climbed into the passenger seat, and Corinne immediately pulled her into a hug. "What happened in there?" Corinne asked. Alice tried to explain, but the words kept getting caught in her throat. She told Corinne about seeing Reynolds, about him pretending not to know her, about the driver's license with the wrong name, about the ring on her finger that proved nothing. Corinne listened, her face growing more concerned with each word. When Alice finished, Corinne was quiet for a long moment. "Alice," she finally said, "are you absolutely certain that was the same man?" The question felt like a knife. "Yes," Alice said, her voice breaking. "I know what my fiancé looks like. That was him." Corinne sat beside her and gently took her phone. "Show me the messages," she said. Alice unlocked the phone and handed it over. Corinne scrolled through the conversation with Reynolds, her brow furrowed. "These are all from someone named Reynolds Scott," she said. "But the man at the wedding had ID that said Nathan Smith." Alice nodded. "I don't understand how that's possible." Corinne kept scrolling, then opened Alice's banking app. "Show me the transfers." Alice pulled up her bank history. The transfers were all there. $6,000 sent 2 weeks ago, $4,000 sent a week later. But when Corinne looked at the account information, her face fell. "Alice, these were sent to different account names. Neither of them say Reynolds Scott or Nathan Smith." Alice grabbed the phone and looked. Corinne was right. The first transfer had been sent to an account under the name RS Consulting LLC. The second transfer was sent to Summit Development Partners. Alice felt her chest tighten. "He said those were his business accounts," she whispered. "He said the firm required payment to business accounts for tax purposes." Corinne looked at her with pity in her eyes. "Alice, I don't think any of this is real." Alice tried calling Reynolds' number. The phone rang once and then went to a message saying the number was no longer in service. She tried again. Same result. The number had been disconnected. Alice dropped her phone and put her head in her hands. "This can't be happening," she said. "This can't be real." But it was real. Reynolds, or Nathan, or whoever he was, had vanished. The phone number didn't work. The bank accounts were under fake business names. There were no photos to prove they'd ever been together. Alice had nothing. No proof. No evidence. Just her word against his. And his word came with a driver's license and a bride who would never believe her. Corinne stayed with Alice that night. She made her tea and tried to get her to eat, but Alice couldn't stomach anything. She lay in bed staring at the wall, replaying every moment of the past 4 months. How had she missed the signs? How had she been so blind? The next morning, Alice forced herself to get up. She couldn't fall apart. She needed answers. She got dressed and told Corinne she wanted to file a police report. Corinne drove her to the nearest police station in Dallas. Alice walked up to the front desk and explained her situation to the officer on duty. She told him about Reynolds, about the money, about the fake name. The officer listened with a neutral expression and then asked her to fill out a report. Alice sat in the station for 2 hours, writing out everything that had happened. When she finished, a detective called her into an office. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He read through her report and then looked up at her. "Ma'am, did this man force you to send him money?" Alice shook her head. "No, but he lied to me. He told me it was for a business opportunity." The detective nodded slowly. "But you willingly transferred the funds?" Alice felt frustration building. "Yes, but he lied about who he was. He used a fake name." The detective leaned back in his chair. "Do you have any photos of the two of you together?" Alice's stomach sank. "No. He always refused to take pictures." The detective's expression didn't change. "Any witnesses who saw you together? Family members? Friends?" Alice thought about it. "My father met him a few times, and Corinne saw him once." The detective wrote something down. "What's the man's name?" Alice hesitated. "I thought it was Reynolds Scott, but he had a driver's license that said Nathan Smith." The detective raised an eyebrow. "So you don't actually know his real name?" Alice felt tears burning in her eyes again. "No." The detective closed the file. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but from what you've told me, this sounds like a relationship dispute, not a criminal matter. You willingly sent money to someone you were in a relationship with. There's no evidence of fraud or coercion. Without proof of his identity or proof that he intentionally deceived you for financial gain, there's not much we can do." Alice's voice rose. "He stood in that mansion and pretended he'd never met me. He's marrying someone else. He took $10,000 from me and disappeared. How is that not fraud?" The detective sighed. "You can pursue this as a civil matter. You can try to sue him for the money. But criminally, we don't have enough to build a case. I'm sorry." Alice left the police station feeling more hopeless than when she'd arrived. Corinne was waiting in the car. "What did they say?" she asked. Alice told her. Corinne's face fell. "So, they're not going to help you?" Alice shook her head. "They said I gave him the money willingly. They said it's a civil matter, not criminal." Corinne reached over and squeezed Alice's hand. "I'm so sorry, Alice. I don't know what to say." Alice stared out the window. "I don't even know who he really is," she whispered. "I don't know his real name. I don't know where he's actually from. I don't know anything." That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She lay in Corinne's guest room and stared at her phone. She opened Instagram and searched for Esther Brooks. She found her account immediately. It was public. The most recent post was from earlier that day. A photo of Esther in her wedding dress, radiant and smiling, standing next to Nathan Smith in his tuxedo. The caption read, "Despite a minor disruption, our day was perfect. Nothing could ruin this love. Forever starts today." Alice scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of people congratulating them, calling them beautiful, wishing them happiness. One comment caught Alice's eye. It was from someone who had apparently been at the wedding. "So glad security removed that crazy woman who tried to ruin everything. Some people are just bitter and can't stand to see others happy." Alice read the comment over and over until the words blurred. That's what she'd become. The crazy woman. The bitter one. The one who crashed a wedding and made a scene. No one would ever believe her side of the story. She scrolled further and found another photo. She closed the app and put her phone face down on the nightstand. She couldn't look at it anymore. She couldn't think anymore. She pulled the blanket over her head and finally, hours later, fell into a restless, dreamless sleep. 1 week passed. Alice returned to Atlanta, but she didn't go home. She couldn't face her empty apartment. Instead, she stayed with another friend, barely speaking, barely eating. She'd lost 12 pounds. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. Her eyes had dark circles underneath them. She looked like someone who'd survived something terrible, and in a way, she had. She spent hours every day on her phone, scrolling through Esther's Instagram. It became an obsession she couldn't break. Each new post felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Esther posted honeymoon photos from Maui, the Four Seasons resort. White sand beaches, sunset dinners, couples massages. Photos of her and Nathan laughing, holding hands, kissing. Living the life Alice had paid for. Alice stared at those photos until her vision blurred. That was her money. Every luxury hotel room, every fancy dinner, every romantic moment had been funded by the $10,000 she'd scraped together. The money her father had saved for her. The money she'd borrowed from Corinne. The last of her savings. It was all there in those Instagram posts, transformed into someone else's happiness. Alice felt something shift inside her. The grief and confusion started hardening into something else. Something colder. She'd spent a week crying, questioning herself, feeling like a victim. But sitting there looking at those photos, she realized something. She had two choices. She could let this destroy her completely, or she could take back some control. She could make him see her, make him acknowledge what he'd done. Alice went to a used car lot the next morning and sold her car. It was a 10-year-old Honda with 160,000 miles on it, but the dealer gave her $3,200. She took the cash and went straight to a travel website. She booked a last-minute flight to Maui. One way. It cost $1,800. She didn't book a return flight because she didn't know if she'd need one. She packed a single small suitcase with clothes and toiletries. Then she went to her storage unit where she'd kept boxes of her father's things after he'd downsized. She found what she was looking for in a shoebox at the bottom of a stack. Her father's old .38 revolver. He'd given it to her years ago when she first moved into her own apartment. "Just in case," he'd said. "A woman living alone needs protection." Alice had never fired it. She'd kept it in the back of her closet and forgotten about it. Now she held it in her hands and felt its weight. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Alice flew to Maui alone, sitting in the back row of the plane, staring out the window at the ocean below. She didn't have a plan exactly. She just knew she needed to confront him. She needed to look him in the eyes and make him tell the truth. She needed him to admit what he'd done. She needed proof that she wasn't insane. When the plane landed, Alice took a taxi to a cheap motel on the outskirts of Wailea. The room was small and smelled like mildew, but it was all she could afford. Alice pulled out her phone and opened Instagram. Esther's most recent story showed her and Nathan at a beachfront restaurant. The geotag said, "Four Seasons Resort Wailea." Alice zoomed in on the photo, memorizing every detail. That night, she took another taxi to the Four Seasons. It was the kind of place Alice had only seen in magazines. Enormous lobby with high ceilings and tropical flowers everywhere. Wealthy tourists walking around in designer clothes. Alice felt out of place in her worn jeans and old t-shirt, but she kept her head down and tried to blend in. She sat in the lobby for 2 hours, pretending to read a magazine, watching the front desk. She saw the staff change shifts around 8 o'clock. 3 employees left, 2 new ones arrived. There was a brief window where only one person was manning the desk and they were dealing with a difficult guest. Alice stood and walked quickly past the desk to the elevators. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. She took the elevator to the 8th floor because she'd seen a housekeeping cart there earlier. When the doors opened, she stepped out and looked around. The hallway was empty except for a housekeeper pushing her cart toward the far end. Alice walked toward her, pulling $200 bills from her pocket. The housekeeper was a small Filipino woman, probably in her 50s. She looked up as Alice approached, and Alice could see the wariness in her eyes. "Excuse me," Alice said quietly. "I need your help with something." The housekeeper stopped. "I'm not supposed to give out room numbers," she said immediately. Alice held up the cash. "I know, but this is important. There's a couple staying here. Esther and Nathan Smith. I just need to know what room they're in." The housekeeper looked at the money, then at Alice's face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she glanced down the hallway and then back at Alice. "Room 847, she said quietly, taking the cash. "But I didn't tell you that." Alice nodded. "You didn't tell me anything." The housekeeper pushed her cart quickly toward the service elevator and disappeared. Alice stood in the hallway alone. Room 847. She walked down the corridor until she found it. The door looked like every other door. She raised her hand to knock and then stopped. What was she doing? She had a gun in her purse. She was standing outside a hotel room ready to confront a man who'd destroyed her life. Was she really going to do this? Alice lowered her hand and walked back to the ice machine alcove. She could see the door to room 847 from there. She'd wait. She'd think. She'd figure out what to say. Hours passed. Alice sat on the floor behind the ice machine, her back against the wall. Guests walked past occasionally, but no one noticed her. Around 10 o'clock, she heard voices. A man and a woman arguing as they walked down the hallway. "You've been acting weird ever since the wedding," the woman was saying. Alice recognized Esther's voice. "What's going on with you?" Nathan's voice responded, irritated. "I'm fine. You're overthinking everything." Alice's heart started pounding. She pressed herself further into the alcove as they approached. They walked right past her without looking. She heard a key card beep, heard the door to 847 open and close. Alice waited 5 more minutes, her mind racing. She could hear them inside the room, their voices muffled but still arguing. Then silence. Alice stood up slowly. Her legs were stiff from sitting. She pulled her purse closer to her body, feeling the weight of the gun inside. She walked to room 847 and stood in front of the door. Her hand was shaking as she raised it. She knocked 3 times. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Nathan stood there in a hotel bathrobe, his hair wet like he'd just showered. He looked relaxed, comfortable, and then he saw her. For a split second, his entire face changed. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly. Recognition and alarm flashed across his features. But he recovered quickly, smoothing his expression back into polite confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked. Alice didn't answer. She pulled the gun from her purse and aimed it directly at his chest. Nathan's hands went up immediately. Whoa. Okay. Just... Alice pushed past him into the room, forcing him backward. Esther was sitting on the bed in a robe, and when she saw Alice and the gun, she screamed. Alice locked the door behind her and turned to face them both. Both of you, she said, her voice steady now. Sit down on the bed. Don't move. Nathan backed toward the bed slowly, his hands still raised. Okay. Just stay calm. We can talk about this. Esther was sobbing, pulling the covers up around herself. Please don't hurt us. Please. We'll give you whatever you want. Alice walked over to the dresser and pulled out her phone. She set it up against the lamp, positioned so the camera was facing the bed. She hit record. I don't want your money, Alice said. He already took mine. She turned back to them, the gun pointed at Nathan. I want the truth. Nathan was staring at the gun, his mind visibly working through his options. Alice could see him trying to figure out what to say, what story to tell. She stepped closer and pressed the barrel of the gun against his forehead. Don't you dare lie to me again, she said. I'm recording everything. You're going to tell me exactly what you did. Nathan's voice came out tight. I already told you at the wedding. I don't know who you are. Alice pressed the gun harder against his skin. How did you receive $10,000 from Alice Branch? The question hung in the air. Nathan stayed silent. Esther was shaking beside him, tears streaming down her face. Alice's finger moved closer to the trigger. Answer me. Right now. Nathan exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The warmth was gone. The charm had evaporated. What was left sounded cold and empty. Fine, he said. You want the truth? I'll give you the truth. Alice kept the gun pressed to his head. Start talking. Nathan looked at her with dead eyes. You weren't special, Alice. You were an investment, a very profitable one. Alice felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice level. Keep going. Nathan settled back slightly against the headboard, his hands still raised. You were the fourth woman in 3 years. I target women like you deliberately. Late 40s, early 50s, financially stable but emotionally vulnerable. Women who've been alone long enough to be grateful when someone finally pays attention to them. Alice's hand shook, but she didn't lower the gun. How do you find them? Nathan almost smiled. It's not hard. I look for single women who own their own businesses. Hairstylists, boutique owners, consultants. Women who post about their work but not their personal lives. That tells me they're alone. I research them. I learn their routines. I figure out where they shop, where they eat, where they spend their free time. Then I engineer a meeting that feels natural. Random. Like fate. Alice thought about the grocery store. It wasn't a coincidence that you were at Kroger that night. Nathan shook his head. I'd been following you for 2 weeks. I knew you shopped there every Wednesday after you closed the salon. I knew what time you'd be in the produce section. Esther made a choking sound beside him. What about me? She whispered. Was that fake too? Nathan glanced at her with something like contempt. You were different. You were the goal, not the means. But I needed money to look the part. That's where women like Alice come in. He turned back to Alice. I needed to look successful to attract someone like Esther, someone young and wealthy, someone whose family has real money. You can't show up to country club dinners in cheap clothes. You can't take a trust fund girl to chain restaurants. I needed designer suits. I needed a nice car. I needed to be able to afford the right lifestyle. Alice felt sick. So you stole from me to impress her. Nathan shrugged. I borrowed from you to invest in my future. There's a difference. Alice's voice rose. You lied to me. You told me you loved me. Nathan looked at her like she was stupid. Of course I did. That's how it works. You meet them, you make them feel special, you promise them a future. Most women who've been alone as long as you have will believe anything if it comes with enough attention. Within a few months, they're ready to do whatever you ask. Some women give you money immediately. Others you have to work a little harder. You were somewhere in the middle. Alice fought to keep her voice steady. What about Samantha? The woman you brought to my salon. Nathan actually laughed. Samantha? She's an actress I hired off Craigslist. Cost me $300 to spend 2 hours pretending to be my girlfriend. Best investment I ever made. Alice felt her world tilting. Why? Nathan looked genuinely confused by the question. Why what? Alice's voice broke. Why did you bring her to my salon if you were already planning to target me? Nathan spoke slowly, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. Because I needed you to see what you wanted. I needed you to look at us and think, that's the kind of relationship I wish I had. That's called planting a seed. 2 weeks later, when I ran into you at the grocery store, you already associated me with something positive. You'd already decided I was the kind of man who treats women well. I didn't have to convince you. You convinced yourself. Esther was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. How many? Alice asked. How many women have you done this to? Nathan considered the question. Including you? 7 over the past 5 years. Different cities, different names, different stories, but the same basic approach. Some women gave me more than you did. One woman in Birmingham gave me $18,000. Another in Charlotte gave me $23,000. You were actually on the lower end. Alice felt bile rising in her throat. And you married Esther for her money. Nathan nodded. Her parents have a $4 million trust fund that she'll inherit when she turns 30. That's next year. This marriage is an investment that will pay better than all 7 of you combined. Esther made a sound like an animal in pain. You don't love me? Nathan looked at her with empty eyes. Love is a transaction. I provide companionship and stability. You provide financial security. That's all marriage is. Alice lowered the gun slightly and looked at Esther. The young woman was destroyed, her face blotchy and wet with tears. You're free now, Alice said quietly. He was never really yours? Esther just stared at her, unable to process what she'd heard. Alice turned back to Nathan and raised the gun again. She had one more question. Did you ever care about me at all? Even a little bit? Nathan looked her straight in the eyes. You were a means to an end. You gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it. That's all you ever were. The words landed like physical blows. Alice felt everything inside her go quiet. The doubt, the grief, the desperate hope that maybe some part of it had been real. All of it died in that moment. She steadied her hand and looked at the man who'd destroyed her life. This is for every woman you erased, she said. She pulled the trigger. The sound was impossibly loud in the small hotel room. Nathan's body jerked backward and then slumped against the headboard. Blood spread across the white hotel bathrobe, soaking into the sheets beneath him. Esther's screams filled the room, high and endless. Alice stood there for a moment, staring at what she'd done. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Nothing. She calmly placed the gun on the floor and walked over to the dresser. She picked up her phone and stopped the recording. The whole confession was there, captured in audio and video. She opened her phone and dialed 911. The operator answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Alice's voice was flat, emotionless. My name is Alice Branch. I just shot a man. Send police and an ambulance. I'll be waiting here. The operator started asking questions, but Alice just set the phone down on the dresser. She walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, her hands folded in her lap. Esther had backed herself into the corner, still screaming. Alice looked at Nathan's body and waited for the police to arrive. Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful, true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write, "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now, let's continue. The police arrived within 6 minutes. Alice heard them in the hallway, shouting commands, ordering the door to be opened. She stood up calmly and unlocked it from the inside. 4 officers rushed in with guns drawn. They saw Nathan's body, saw the blood, saw Esther huddled in the corner. They ordered Alice to the ground. She complied without resistance, lying face down on the carpet while an officer cuffed her hands behind her back. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just let them do what they needed to do. They read her rights. They searched her. They found her phone on the dresser, with the recording still saved. One officer picked it up, and Alice told him what was on it. "That's his confession," she said. "He admitted everything." Alice was taken to the police station and placed in a holding cell. She was charged with first-degree murder the next morning. A public defender was assigned to her case, a young woman named Rebecca, who looked overwhelmed from the moment they met. Rebecca listened to Alice's story, and then listened to the recording. When it finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "The confession is compelling, but it was obtained under duress. You held a gun to his head. Any decent prosecutor will argue it's inadmissible. Alice had expected this. Can't you use it to show pattern of behavior? To show motive?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "We can try, but it might not be enough to establish your guilt or innocence. The judge will have to decide what's admissible." The case became a media sensation within days. News outlets picked up the story and ran with it. Woman shoots fiancé on his honeymoon. Romance scam turns deadly. Hairstylist murders groom in Hawaii. Alice's mugshot was everywhere. So were photos of Nathan and Esther from their wedding. The internet exploded with opinions. Some people called Alice a hero. She did what needed to be done. He was a predator. She saved other women from him. Others called her a murderer. She had no right to take his life. This is vigilante justice. 2 wrongs don't make a right. The comment sections were battlegrounds where strangers argued about whether financial abuse justified murder. The FBI got involved after the recording surfaced. They launched an investigation into Nathan's activities and discovered he'd been operating under 6 different identities across multiple states. Bank accounts under fake names, P.O. boxes in different cities, burner phones. He'd left a trail, but it was scattered and deliberately confusing. Within 2 weeks, 3 other women came forward. Denise Holland from Birmingham, Beverly Carter from Charlotte, Lorraine Fisher from Nashville. All 3 women told nearly identical stories. They'd met Nathan, though he'd used different names with each of them. He'd romanced them, proposed, asked for money, and then vanished. Denise had lost $18,000. Beverly had lost $23,000. Lorraine had lost $15,000. The media interviewed all 3 women, and they all said the same thing. Alice Branch had done what they'd wished they could do. The trial started 8 months after the shooting. Alice sat in the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Alice Branch had traveled to Hawaii with a loaded gun. She'd tracked down Nathan Smith. She'd held him at gunpoint and then killed him. Premeditation, first-degree murder. The defense argued that Alice had been driven to temporary insanity by sustained psychological and financial abuse, that she'd been gaslit, manipulated, and financially ruined. That Nathan Smith, whose real name turned out to be Calvin Porter, had been a serial con artist who destroyed multiple women's lives. Rebecca Chen fought to get the recording admitted as evidence. The prosecution fought just as hard to keep it out. The judge ruled that the recording could be considered during sentencing, but not during the guilt phase of the trial. The jury wouldn't hear it when deciding if Alice was guilty. They'd only hear it if she was found guilty, to help determine her sentence. It was a partial victory at best. Esther Brooks testified for the prosecution. She looked thin and fragile on the stand, dressed in all black. She described the night of the shooting. Alice entering the room with a gun, the interrogation, the confession, the shooting. She cried through most of her testimony. When asked if she believed Nathan had loved her, Esther's voice broke. "I don't know what was real anymore," she said. "I thought I knew him. I thought we were building a life together. Now I don't know if any of it was true." Alice took the stand in her own defense. Rebecca had advised against it, but Alice insisted. She needed to tell her story. She needed people to understand. She described meeting Nathan, the relationship, the engagement, the money, the trip to Dallas, the moment she saw him at the wedding, the police refusing to help her, the feeling of being erased, of losing everything, of having no way to prove she'd ever existed in his life. "I didn't go to Hawaii planning to kill him," Alice said, her voice steady. "I went there to confront him, to make him tell the truth, to prove to myself I wasn't insane. The gun was for protection. I didn't know what he'd do when he saw me." The prosecution challenged her on cross-examination. Why bring a gun if she just wanted to talk? Why not call the police in Hawaii? Why take the law into her own hands? Alice's father never made it to the trial. 2 weeks into the proceedings, he suffered a major stroke. Alice's lawyer petitioned the court to allow her to visit him in the hospital. The request was denied. Too much of a security risk. Alice received the news in her cell and broke down for the first time since the shooting. She'd been holding herself together, staying strong, but knowing her father was dying and she couldn't be there shattered something in her. Corinne visited him for Alice, held his hand, told him Alice loved him. He died 3 days later without ever seeing his daughter again. Alice was informed by a guard who handed her a phone. Corinne was on the other end, crying. "I'm so sorry, Alice. He's gone." The verdict came back 2 weeks later. Guilty of second-degree murder. The jury found that Alice had acted with intent to kill, but acknowledged the extreme emotional distress she'd been under. Not first degree, not premeditated in the traditional sense, but still, murder. Alice showed no reaction when the verdict was read. She'd known this was coming. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. That's when the recorded confession would finally matter. Rebecca played it in court. The entire room heard Calvin Porter admit to targeting vulnerable women, heard him describe his methods, heard him say Alice had been nothing but an investment. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge considered everything. Then he announced the sentence. 18 years in prison. Eligible for parole after 12. Alice closed her eyes. 18 years. She'd be 59 when she got out. Outside the courthouse, protests erupted. People held signs on both sides. Justice for Alice versus murder is murder. The case became a reference point in debates about vigilante justice, about how the legal system handles financial abuse, about whether victims have the right to take justice into their own hands when the system fails them. Alice was transferred to a women's correctional facility in California 6 months after sentencing. The facility was medium security, housing about 800 women. Alice was assigned to a cell with one roommate, a woman serving time for embezzlement who didn't ask questions. Alice spent most of her days in the prison library. She read books about law, about psychology, about anything that would occupy her mind. Other inmates had heard about her case. Some respected her. Some thought she'd done the right thing. Others kept their distance, viewing her as dangerous. Alice didn't care either way. She kept to herself and counted the days. Letters started arriving within her first month. Denise Holland wrote first. A 3-page letter thanking Alice for what she'd done, saying she'd been able to sleep through the night for the first time in years knowing Calvin Porter was dead. Beverly Carter wrote next, sharing her own story in detail, talking about the shame she'd felt for falling for his lies. Lorraine Fisher wrote monthly, telling Alice about the support group she'd started for victims of romance fraud. All 3 women had teamed up with a state legislator in Tennessee to push for stronger laws around financial abuse. They wanted Alice to know she'd created change, that her actions had meant something. Alice read the letters but never responded. She didn't know what to say. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt empty. The prison therapist noted in Alice's file that she was severely depressed. She rarely spoke during their sessions. She ate minimally. She'd lost 20 pounds since arriving. Other inmates reported that Alice would sometimes sit in the common area and stare at nothing for hours. One woman said she'd seen Alice crying in the shower late at night, trying to muffle the sound. The therapist recommended increased monitoring and antidepressants. Alice refused the medication. She told the therapist she deserved to feel what she felt. That numbness or artificial happiness wouldn't change what she'd done or what had been done to her. The guilt she carried wasn't about killing Calvin Porter. She felt no remorse for that. The guilt was about everything else. About not listening to her father's warnings. About giving away money she couldn't afford to lose. About throwing away her life for a man who'd never been real. Esther Brooks disappeared from social media entirely. Her Instagram account went private, then deleted. Friends who knew her told reporters she'd moved back in with her parents. She was in intensive therapy multiple times a week. She'd been prescribed medication for anxiety and PTSD. She couldn't sleep without pills. She couldn't leave the house without having panic attacks. The wedding she'd been so excited about had become the worst day of her life. She'd canceled everything, returned gifts, sent apologies to vendors. She worked quietly with a nonprofit that helped fraud victims, but she refused all interviews and public appearances. People who saw her said she looked like a ghost of herself. The question everyone asked was whether she'd ever recover. No one had an answer. The FBI's investigation finally uncovered Calvin Porter's real identity. He'd been born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1985. His real name was Calvin Porter. He had a criminal record dating back to his 20s. Identity theft, check fraud, forgery. He'd served 2 years in prison in 2012. His parents were both deceased. No siblings. No living family at all. When he died, no one claimed his body. The county buried him in an unmarked grave in Tennessee. No funeral. No mourners. No one to remember him except the women whose lives he'd destroyed. The FBI estimated he'd stolen over $120,000 from women across 5 states. Alice's case was the only one that had ended in violence. All the others had simply been women left broken. Alice would be eligible for parole in 2034. She'd be 59 years old. By then, she would have spent 12 years in prison. 12 years of watching the world move on without her. Her salon was long gone. Her clients had found new stylists. Her apartment had been emptied. Everything she'd built had disappeared. The question no one could answer was what would be left of Alice Branch when she finally got out. Would there be anything of the woman who'd once dreamed of being an investigative journalist? The woman who'd built a business with her own hands? The woman who'd believed, despite everything, that love was still possible? Or would prison take whatever was left and leave behind only the woman who'd pulled the trigger? Time would tell. For now, Alice just existed. One day at a time, counting down 12 years until the possibility of freedom. This is the story of Alice Branch, a woman who spent 47 years building a life from nothing, whose mother abandoned her when she was just 9 years old, whose father worked himself into the ground to give her opportunities he never had, who turned rejection into resilience, who built a business with her own hands when journalism wouldn't give her a chance, who took care of her aging father while struggling to keep her salon afloat, who believed, despite years of disappointment, that love was still possible. She was wrong about the man, but she was right about one thing. Calvin Porter existed, and for a brief moment in that hotel room, before everything ended, he finally saw her. He finally acknowledged what he'd done. If this story affected you, if it made you think, if it made you question anything, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week on this channel, we bring you true crime cases that go beyond the headlines. We explore the psychology. We examine the choices. We look at the moments that changed everything. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Do you think Alice was justified? Or did she go too far? Was this justice? Or was this murder? There's no easy answer, and that's exactly why we need to talk about it. And if you know someone in a relationship that feels off, someone who's being asked for money, someone whose partner won't take photos or introduce them to family, share this video. Sometimes a story can save a life. Sometimes hearing what happened to someone else can help you see what's happening to you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next investigation.